see Brother Ken and them about that also, okay? And we'll have a good time that evening with all that stuff, all right? And then we got a card here from Brother Josh and the Bell family. Thank you so much for being there for us for the passing of R.C. Bell. Thank you for the barbecue plates and flowers. It's a blessing to know that you're in our that you are there in our time of need, and we had friends and family praying for us. Thank you, and that's from the Bell family. I can't read cursive, so I'm barely read straight English. So, but anyways, continue praying for them in the days ahead. All right, and then our men's conference. Some of you asked me about it a while ago. It's March the 21st through the 22nd. It's a Friday evening and Saturday morning meeting, and we'll go down, stay at a motel Friday evening. After the service, we'll spend the night, and you're responsible for your own room. We'll get the same motel, but you're responsible for your own room, all right? And I don't sleep with other men, okay? I need peace and quiet when I sleep, and so if you want to go, and I'd love for you to go because it is the pastor and his Men of Might conference, all right? And I said this the other day, it's weird when just the pastor's there because they're preaching to both of us. So I'd love for you to go, and it is a good meeting, good preaching all the way around. And so that's March 21st to the 22nd. All right. Is that everything? Is there anything else going on? Oh, yeah. Our bouncing baby boy, he is here. Not here, but he's here in the world anyway, and doing good. And so you pray for Dylan and Rebecca and me and Jessica, and because we got Emmett now. So I don't know what happened with that deal. They're supposed to keep both of them. And then we got 9 other babies at the house too, and that are, they whine and cry all the time. So. But anyways, anybody needs a Doberman, see me, okay? All right, let's sing.
Zach, if you would lead prayer. Page 183. There is a name I love to hear. I love to sing its word. It sounds like music in my ear. The sweetest name on earth. Oh, how I love
chapter number 14 tonight. Luke chapter number 14. And I hate we couldn't have church Sunday evening, but that was sort of out of my power, right? Or control, but out of power. And so that nursery bathroom, too, by the way, it's out of order right now. So if y'all try to sneak in there tonight, it's not working. So don't use it. So, but anyways, I hate there wasn't no power, but sometimes that's just how it is. Trees fall and ain't nothing you can do about it. So, but anyways, Luke chapter number 14, we didn't have no power Sunday morning. We didn't have no power Sunday night, did we? And I hope we got power tonight. Luke chapter number 14. Luke 14. And there's a lot in here to unpack. I was thinking about, I got preached tomorrow night, and Brother Granville Branch, and I was studying this. I don't know that I will preach it, but nonetheless, there's a lot here to unpack, but I'm going to share a little bit here in the latter part of this chapter, of chapter number 14. And one of the things that you learn quickly in ministry, sometimes you want everybody involved in everything that's going on. And so that's your drive, that's your desire. Any pastor that's worth anything, they want to see everybody serve God. And not just a select few. And, we're not Calvinists when it comes to serving God, but we want to see everybody do that and serve God with their life. And here in Luke chapter number 14, really, the Lord taught me a lesson in here that not everybody that's saved is going to be a disciple. And being a Christian and being a disciple is two totally different things. And that's what I want us to look at tonight. And if I were to ask you that tonight, are you a disciple? Don't answer that right now because I've not asked you. I ain't explained it to you yet. Most people would say, well, yeah, I'm a follower of Christ or something like that, or I'm a disciple of Christ. Yeah, I could call myself a disciple. And but I want you to understand what a disciple is. Look with me in verse number 25 of chapter number 14. And we'll read here to the end. He said, and there went great multitude with him, and he turned and he said unto them, if any man come to me and hate not his father and mother and wife and children and brethren and sister, yea, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. Now, we often say we're not Baptist by preference, we're Baptist by conviction. And, the reason we're Baptist, and these people here evidently were Baptists, right? And because the only way you can be a disciple is to hate people. And that's what we are, right? And so, but he gives that whole list of things there, and I'll explain all that to you here in just a moment. And of the word hate here, it's not the word hate like we use in our terminology today. In verse 27, he said, whosoever doth not bear his cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. Again, he says it over and over. For which of you, intending to build a tower, sitteth not down first and counteth the cost, whether he have sufficient to finish? Least happily after he hath laid the foundation and is not able to finish it, all that behold it begin to mock him. All right? Now remember that. When you start something and you don't finish it, he said people will mock you for that. And listen, in our, I guess our analogy to put it, us as men, as husbands, it's our wife that does that, is it not? And we start something, we don't finish it at the house. And like, are you ever going to finish it? You said you started that and you didn't even finish that. Does y'all ever have that problem? And amen, I'm glad James does. I don't, but I was just wondering if y'all did. And but anyway, he said in verse 29, least happily after he hath laid the foundation and not able to finish it, all that behold it began to mock him, saying, this man began to build and was not able to finish it. Or what king going to make war against another king sitteth not down first and consulteth whether he be able with 10,000 to meet him that cometh against him with 20,000? Or else, while the other is yet great way off, he sendeth an ambassage, which is an ambassador, and desireth conditions of peace. So likewise, whosoever he be of you that forsaketh not all that he hath, he cannot be my disciple. Salt is good, but if salt hath lost its savor, wherewith shall it be seasoned? It is neither fit for the land, nor yet for the dunghill, but men cast it out And he that hath ears to hear, let him hear. And one of the interesting things about this whole verse is this. In verse number 25, the Bible said, there went with him a great multitude. And so he's got a lot of people following him at this point in time in his ministry. And really he's separating out those who are serious and those who are not serious. And he's seeking disciples, those that will follow him. And the word disciple just simply means a learner. A learner. And if you're a Christian, you ought to have a desire to be a learner. And you could be considering yourself a disciple. And a learner is someone who is learning from someone by watching them and what they do and how they do it. And here's ultimately what they're trying to do is be like them. That's what a disciple is. And they are learning how to be like the one that's teaching them. And now listen, it's not about being like Tim, because I'm not teaching you about Tim. I'm teaching you about Jesus. And he's the one that we got to learn from. And that's the one we want to be like. Now, Paul mentioned to himself that he wished that men, the life he lived, he wasn't ashamed of the life he lived, and men ought to follow the ways that he was following, but he was following the Lord. That was the point of what he was saying. He wouldn't say, hey, look at me, toot, I'm a good Christian. But as he followed the Lord, he said, you follow me. And so here the word disciple is that of a learner. And so Jesus called his disciples, and he says to them two things. First of all, he said this, come unto me. And then the next thing he said was, come after me, or follow me. And I want to say this, it pays to serve Jesus. And it pays every day in our life if you'll serve him and live for him and honor him with your life. But there's a difference. Listen to me, there's a difference in just saying I'm saved and being a disciple, all right? And there's a difference in saying I'm saved and I try to honor God with my life, and all that's good. But it's different. You got to separate it out from being a true disciple of Christ and what it really means to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. And it's not just about following him. He said, you come unto me, but then he said, I want you to follow me. And what he does, he wants us to do in his life and be a disciple for him. Now, he only had 12, and that's all he had. And most churches are made up of about 12% of disciples, and that's about it. It doesn't matter how large the church is. It can be 2,000 or 3,000, but there's only going to be about 12% of that that's actually disciples, that are learners and laborers and worker in the field and in the ministry of the church. And it's just across the board like that. You don't have to be like that, but that's just the way it is sometimes. And so we sing that song, it pays to serve him, and it does pay to serve him. And but I want to tell you something, it pays to serve Jesus, but I want you to understand this, it also costs to serve Jesus. Every step of the way, it's going to cost you something. And I'm not just talking about being saved, I'm talking about being a disciple. It's going to cost you something. That's what this whole text is about, that being a disciple of Christ, it's not just some easy-peasy thing. It's not just some whim of a thing. It'll cost you something in life, and it's going to cost you, listen, it's not cheap, and we ought not to be looking for some cheap way to serve him, but we ought to serve him the way that he has called us to serve him. Listen, salvation is free, discipleship costs. And y'all, everybody here, everybody all right? And it's free, but to be a disciple, listen, it's going to cost you something. You can't earn salvation by any means, but when it comes to being a disciple, you're going to pay for something. And I'm not talking about financially per se. You're going to pay in other ways. And so I want you to see what's going on here. Here's what's happening in verse number 25. The Bible said in verse 25, and there was a great multitude with him. There's a great crowd that's following. And all through the Gospels, we read of the crowd. We read of the masses. We see where they're coming after him. They're thronging him. They're following him. They're watching him. And Jesus said, hey, watch this. I want to show y'all a great miracle. Watch this miracle. And the miracle was this. He's going to thin the crowd out. And there's numerous times he does this throughout the Scripture. He'll throw a parable out there, and then it's like, and they walked with him no more. Or he'll throw some saying out there that, except you eat of my flesh, drink of my blood, you can't be my disciple. And so that's what he's doing here too. And a great crowd is interested in Jesus. A great crowd has seen the miracles. They've heard the miracles. They've watched everything. And now he said, listen, let's see who's really serious about this thing. And so he begins to speak to them and share some things with them about loving their father and their mother, or hating their mother and their father, their brother, their sister, their son, their daughter, and he goes through this discourse of a builder, and he goes through this discourse of an army or being in a battle, and he talks about the salt, and he gives them all these things, and the crowd slowly got littler and littler and littler and littler. And why? Because they were not interested in being a disciple of Jesus Christ. And when he began to talk to them about that, they was like, well, I'm not interested in that. That didn't mean they wasn't saved, but it was still a sorry thing. And it was still a pretty lazy thing. And, I think all of us would agree, we don't like nobody to use us just to use us to get something, do we? And if we like people, if we were to save somebody, if we could spiritually save somebody, and we can't, but if we could, we would expect that somebody to at least serve us a little bit, wouldn't we? And at least if we told them to do something or asked something of them, we saved them, we kept their soul out of hell, and we would think that if we just asked them to do something, surely they would do it. But it don't work that way all the time. And that's where we're going with this, and looking at discipleship and the importance of stewardship and that, and becoming a disciple of Christ, not just a follower and not just a fan of Christ, but being a disciple of Christ, a learner of Christ, of who He is. And because once you get saved, again, that's free. But there is some fine print you need to read and understand, and when it comes to being a disciple and a learner of who He is. And listen, there's a lot of folk here on Sunday morning that ain't here tonight. There's a lot of folk that come back on Sunday evenings that don't come back on Wednesday evenings, and different people have their different reasons for doing different things. I don't understand it all. And listen, people come on Sunday morning, they'll never come back on Sunday night or Wednesday night or revival week or mission week, and they live a fine life, and they do this, and they do this, and they do that. And you could ask them, are you a disciple of Christ? Most would say, hey, yeah, I'm a disciple of Christ, but really they're not. And they're just a fan of who Christ is. And listen, they may be saved, they're just not a disciple of Christ. And I want to encourage you on a few things this evening about how to stay fully committed and be a disciple. And the importance of that, because we all, listen, no matter where you are in life, even in the secular world of work, businesses need people who will be disciples. Be a learner of the business. Be a learner of the trade. Be a learner and watching that one that's above you, learn from them and glean from them. And a lot of people have no problem with that, and because that gets more money in their pocket, right? But Christ said, I want you to come follow me and live for me, honor me with your life. But if you do, it's going to cost you something. If you do, it's not free. It's going to be a tough road, and if you do. And listen, a lot of people, I love combat sports, and I love watching people beat people up all the time. And you would look at them and think, man, them some rough people. There's some they got some gumption about them, and they're fearless people. But listen, in the spiritual side of things, really, listen, they're nothing. They're really nothing. Because the real warriors are those that are disciples and followers of Christ. And because they've given up everything to go follow Christ with their life. And listen, what we look at in life and what we look at on the secular side of things in life and think, man, they're great people, they're great this, and they're the best at that. And that's good, and there's nothing wrong with being good at things like that. But at the end of the day, it's better to be a disciple of Christ than it is anything. And so Jesus turns to the crowds here that's following him, and he begins to talk about discipleship. And you can tell a lot. When a man gets saved, a woman gets saved, or whoever, and they give their life to Christ, and you ask them about discipleship, or you ask them, hey, would you like to take this? Would you like to take this book and read it and go through it and do all this? And about 3 months after that, you may hit them up again about, hey, have you been reading that book? Well, no, not really. You automatically know. Listen, I'm not saying they're not saved, but they ain't interested in following Christ. It may have sounded good there in the altar in the very beginning, but I think sometimes people get in this thing and they think, this is what I'm going to be. I'm going to be a preacher. I'm going to be this. I'm going to do that. And then it starts costing them something. It starts costing you friends. It starts costing you more time. It starts costing you really having to rely on God and not yourself, and you have to talk to Him and pray and read the Bible more. And they're like, man, I just don't know about this. And so instead of a disciple, they just go back to being a follower. And so that's sort of the discourse he gives here. So look with me, first of all, this evening, a disciple must worship at any cost. In verses 26 through 27, Jesus said, if any man come to me and hate not his father and mother and wife and children and brethren and sister, yea, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. And whosoever doth not bear his cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. And now what is the cost that Jesus is talking about here? It's a personal thing that he's dealing with. It's personal relationships. It's your person that he's dealing with here. And so what I'm saying is this: the cost of being a disciple is this right here. You've got to be able to worship the right person. That's what he's dealing with here is alive. Most of the time, the reason people won't serve God is because they're either in the way or family's in the way. And he said, listen, if you're gonna be my disciple, a disciple must worship at any cost. And he said, if you're going to follow me, you got to be willing to give this up. You got to be willing to hate this and this and this and this. And he goes on down the line, and you say, but preacher, but don't the Bible say we're supposed to love our father and love our mother? Ain't we supposed to love our children? And didn't Jesus teach that this is what we were supposed to do? And yes, that's exactly what he taught. And what he's saying here is not that you have a disdain and a hate for them, but the word hate that he's using here has the ideal of a choice. And you have to understand the way the Bible is using the word hate here. He's not saying to kill them or whatever, but he's talking about you got to make a decision. And the decision is this: who you going to worship? Who you going to worship? Are you really going to follow me and come after me? If you are, you got to be willing to hate all this. You got a choice to make. The Bible says, can a man serve two masters? He'll either love the one and hate the other. And so that's about a choice. It's not about a disdain. It's not about, I'll just soon see them dead or despise or whatever. But what he's saying is you got to make a clear choice here. And the way the world uses this word hate is not the way Jesus is using the word hate. And what he's saying is this, that if you're going to come after me, I must become first in everything that you do. I must be before all them. I must be before mother. I must be before father. I must be before your children. I must be before your wife. I must be before your husband. And he's saying, if you're going to come after me, listen, a disciple must worship at any cost. It's going to cost you. You're going to have to choose who you're really going to worship. Are you going to put me first, or are you going to put them first? If mom and daddy look at you and say, no, you're not going to the mission field, you're going to listen to them, you're going to listen to me. Well, I'd rather not for you. I mean, just think about it. You sit down with your parents say, well, listen, I'd rather for you not go do something like that because, you're going to be gone. We're not going to be able to see the grandchildren. We're not going to be able to do this and this. And listen, they go through all that, and you get home, you get thinking about it and how bad that's going to be. They ain't going to be able to see them. They ain't going to spend no time with them and all that. Listen, you got to pull away from all that. If you're going to be a disciple, it ain't about what they want. It's about what He wants in their life. You can't worship mom and daddy, and you can't worship the children. You got to turn them loose and let them serve God with their life. And listen, to be a disciple, the worship's going to cost you something. And Jesus said, listen, you got to make a choice. You're either going to serve God or you're not. And are you either going to follow God with your life or not? And listen, do you really love Jesus that much that He is first in everything? I mean, before the wife, before the husband, before the children, Jesus will always be first, because that's what he's saying. I must come before all. But there comes a time when you got to make a choice in life. And there's a lot of marriages that one way or the other, whether it's the wife or whether it's the husband, it's being held back from being something beautiful for God because one of them is holding the other back. Now, it's a twofold sin. The one that's allowing it to be held back is just as much a sin as the one that is holding it back. Because whether my wife is going to go with me or not, I'm going. Whether my wife is in agreement with, serving Jesus or not, listen, I'm going to serve him with my life. Whether my husband is on board or not, I'm going to do it. But listen, so many times one is at odds, and we ain't getting involved. Most of the time, it's the woman. You ain't getting involved. You ain't committing to nothing at that church. And that's fine. That's a choice that Shem has to make. I ain't going to call it him because he's a sissy if he can't make decisions. But Shem has to make that decision that Shem going to listen to her. Listen, Jesus said, if you're going to be a disciple, if you're going to be a real follower of me, you got to let me come first. I must come before wife. I must come before the husband. Any human relationship, I must be first. And so disciples must worship at any cost. Whatever it is that God is calling or pulling or wooing or burdened about, listen, it must be him. It ain't about what everybody else thinks. It's about what he thinks and about what he puts in your heart and in your life. And I think about parents, and I think about Brother Philip, and to leave here and to go to another state and to pastor, and his children are here, and then you got children out here and children over there serving in different places. We got some of his grandchildren here tonight and serving in different places. Listen, it ain't because he hates Isaac, and it ain't because he hates Caleb and Caleb hates him, and it ain't because he hates Ethan and Ethan hates him. And who's the other one? Luke. And it ain't because Luke, they hate each other. It ain't because that. It's because they love God. And if they love God and want to be a true disciple, a learner of Christ, you got to be willing to say, hey, y'all serve here, but we going here to serve. And so you got to figure out who you're going to worship. And because when human relationships becomes more important to us than our relationship with Christ, then you're not fit to be a disciple. And that's what he's saying to all these people that are thronging him and following him and waiting to see another miracle, and maybe a miracle for them. And then he turns around and gives them the bad news. They're like, well, you know what? I bet we're going to go back down the house here, and we're going to do something different here. Because, listen, there's a difference in self-denial and denying of self. Self-denial, you can say, you know what? I believe I'm going to do without food today. You know what? I believe I'm going to do without sleep tonight. I did that last night. You know what? I believe I'm going to do this. I'm going to do without that, and I'll be all right with this. That is self-denial. That's what you're doing. But self-denial and denying self is totally different. Simon Peter, he forsook his nets. He quit work. But it took forever for Simon Peter to forsake Simon Peter. It took him some time. And so I'm just saying, are you willing to take yourself off of the throne of your life, family, friends? Take yourself off that throne and put Christ on the throne. If not, you'll never be a disciple. What's called a disciple in the Bible. And so, yes, a lot of preaching I preach on is about being a disciple. And that's why we do what we do. That's why we soul win. That's why we teach. And that's why we disciple those that do get saved, to try to keep them and turn them right into a disciple and a learner, and teach them to teach somebody else to teach somebody else. And, and just go on and on and on. That's why we do that. And so that makes a lot of sense when preaching about those things. It just goes nowhere because people ain't interested in that. Because they are on the throne of their life. They're on the throne of their heart, and it doesn't matter what Jesus says. They're not going to be a learner of him because they're stuck on their self. And I'm just saying, a disciple this evening must worship at any cost and lay it all at the foot of the cross and allow Him. I was thinking about this week. I was forgetting who I was reading about. I forget which preacher it was. It wasn't G. Campbell Morgan, though I was reading something from him. It was somebody else. But anyway, and I was reading something about the cross, where Jesus said, take up your cross and follow me, or you couldn't be His disciples. And I was thinking about the cross, and they made reference to this. You know, when you think about the cross, when a man is crucified with Christ, as Paul said, nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. When a man is crucified on the cross, he's facing only one direction. And I thought that was interesting. If you're crucified with Christ, and if you're going to take up your cross and follow Him, if you're on that cross, listen to me, you're facing only one direction. And that's it. Number two, not only are you facing one direction, if you're on that cross and you get on that cross, you're not going back. You're there. You're not tied down. You're nailed down. I don't want to be tied down in the ministry. I want it nailed down. You know what I mean? And then if you're on that cross, we know this even from Jesus, you've done said your final goodbyes. Though none go with me, still I'm going to follow. And so to be crucified with Christ and to take up our cross and follow Him is to look forward. There's no way of going backwards. We've done said our goodbyes, whether you go with me or don't go with me. We're going to serve God with our life. As for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. You're facing one direction. And so I say tonight, do you really want to be a disciple? Because if you do, it's going to cost you something. And you must worship at any cost. Number two, a disciple must work at any cost. In verse 28, he deals with which of you intended to build a tower, and he says, not down and first count the cost, whether he have sufficient to finish it, at least happily after he hath laid the foundation and is not able to finish it. Behold, it began to mock him, saying, this man began to build and is not able to finish it. And now Jesus is looking at these disciples and he's saying, listen, there is this cost of worship and that you're going to face. But listen, as a disciples must work at any cost. All right? And so he uses this illustration here of not the crucifixion, but construction. And he talks about beginning to build something, and then you stop right in the middle of it. And I guess if you could really find the Baptist anywhere in this text, here's where it's going to be at. And he uses a tower. A tower was often placed in the vineyards, which was a place of protection for the vineyards, but it was also right in the midst of fruitfulness is where those towers would be. And so he says, listen, why would you start building a tower in the middle of all this, and then all of a sudden you just quit? And our life is like this tower is what he's saying. But a lot of Christians get saved and they start out good. And they start building, they make a lot of commitments to God, and spiritually they've been conceived and everything's going good, and they do right, and they do right, and they do right. And listen, once you get born again, it's about what does the Lord have for you next? All right? These disciples is not just doing what they want to do after they got saved. A disciple is a learner. A disciple is going to be doing something that somebody else wants them to do. And that's what Jesus is doing. They were spiritually conceived, and now they're to be sacrificially constructed. And he said, listen, you need to count the cost. You're going to come to the altar and make a commitment and vow a vow. He said, you're better off not to vow a vow than to make a vow and not keep it. And start out and say, you know what, bless God, I'm going to be this in the church. I'm going to work hard at this in the church. I'm going to step it up here in the church. And you start out, man, and you've laid the foundation. Everything's going good. You've been spiritually conceived, and sacrificially you begin to construct your life. And you get that thing about half built. And just done. Just done. Listen, a disciple must work at any cost. You say, but preacher, I didn't realize it was going to require me to be at church on Wednesday nights. I didn't know I was going to get fussed at if I didn't show up on Sunday morning. Well, preacher, I didn't know that we had to go tell other people about Jesus. I mean, I didn't know all them gospel tracts wasn't just there for, a nice picture frame or something. I didn't know we were supposed to take them and hand them out. I didn't know I was going to have to tell people about Jesus. I can't do this. All right. It's just a choice you got to make. You're either going to serve God or you're going to serve mammon. You're going to love the one, hate the other. You're going to put one before the other, whichever way, but it's your choice. And but you got to sit down and count the cost. And if you're going to serve God, there's going to be a cost. Salvation was free, but to serve Him and live for Him and be His disciple, it's going to cost you something in life. And, people today, they used to be faithful in Bible study. They used to be faithful in reading their Bible. They used to be faithful in praying. They used to be faithful in tithing. They used to be faithful in missions. They used to be faithful. And listen, they make all these commitments, and all of a sudden they just quit. And I'm just saying, as a disciple, you got to work at any cost. It's going to cost you. It's going to be different than just a normal life, and that everybody else wants to live, because there's a greater work to be done. And so a disciple must work at any cost. Number 3, a disciple must war at any cost. We're in a battle. We're called to be crucified. We're called as a construction worker. But now he's talking about we're called into conflict. In verse 30 and 31, he said, "And what king going to make war against another sitteth not down first and consulteth whether he's able with 10,000 to meet him, and cometh against him with 20,000, or else, while the other is yet a great way off, he sendeth an ambassador, and desireth conditions of peace." Now again, listen, we're at war in this thing. It's not just worship, it's not just work, but it's a war that we're in, because we're still living in this world. And what Jesus is saying is this, that listen, this world hates you. It hated me. And if it persecuted me, it's going to persecute you. And if it persecuted you, just remember it's persecuted me. And you're going to war with the world. The world hates you, man. And you say, "Preacher, are you at war?" Absolutely. I'm all the time. Listen, it's every day of our life. We're in a battle. It's a conflict. And Jesus wants His disciples, He wants them to be warriors and not cowards. And most of the time, again, it's about counting the cost. He deals with this conflict now. It's not just the constructional cost, but it's the conflict cost. Some people, listen, they'll get going real good, and as soon as conflict hits, I mean, I'm talking about as soon as they feel like they've upset somebody, like, "I just can't do this no more. They're mad at me." Listen, they was mad at Him, Jesus. They hated Him. The world hates you. Well, they're my brother. They're my sister. Well, if they hate you for being truthful, then that's on their end, not your end. But a lot of people, man, they get so caught up in this conflict thing, and once they experience conflict in the battle, they're like, "Man, I can't do this. I mean, I enlisted in the Army, but I didn't know I was going to have to carry a gun around. I mean, I drove the tank and got to train with the tank, but I never knew I was going to have to get in it and really go shoot somebody." He said, don't a man of war, does he not sit down and think of the cost? I know God called me to preach, but I didn't know people was going to get mad at me for saying something. They are. I didn't know everything I said, preacher, was going to offend my Sunday school class. I mean, they get offended over everything. They do. It's just how it is. It's a conflict. It's a war that we're in. And listen, we're not raising cowards. We want warriors in this thing. He said, well, we have 10,000. They have 20,000. So what? The Bible said, if God be for us, then who can be against us? And if God is for us, we really have nothing to worry about. I like what one soldier told his comrades. He said it like this. He said, "Men, we're surrounded by the enemy. Don't let any of them escape." And that's how it ought to be. And but here's what we do. We throw up the white flag. As soon as conflict comes, that's what we want to do, is throw up the white flag. And listen, I did it for years. And I would see something brewing, and it'd be some conflict of something dumb. And I just, you know what, I ain't dealing with this. And what I found out was if you don't deal with it, it turns into not just conflict, it turns into a World War III. And so it's a whole lot easier just to stand up against it and war in this thing and fight in this thing. It's not about fighting for the Baptists. It's about fighting for Christ. And when you're His disciples, you're willing to pull the sword out and chop the ear off of anybody. You're ready to fight and are ready to war in this thing. Conflict's going to come. And again, soldiers should not be cowards. Soldiers should not be compromisers. And but if you're a coward, you're always going to compromise. Any soldier that's a coward will compromise any platoon. They'll compromise it. Why? Because they're cowards. And they won't stand up against the enemy. They won't fight the way they need to fight. And so here's what he said here, that we could send our ambassadors and make peace with them. What he was saying was, listen, you can't make peace with the devil. You can't. You can't compromise with sin. And Jesus is saying, he said, listen, you need to count the cost of this thing. And it doesn't matter if they got 20,000, you got 10,000. You need to count the cost of it. And listen, you're going to be all right. I'm going to give you victory. Everything's going to be okay. And but if you don't count the cost, you're going to get out on the battlefield and you're going to say, you know what? I need to just go have a word with Mr. Putin because I don't think we can do nothing. And so you go get your little ambassador and send your little ambassador over there and try to come up to a peace treaty. Why? Because you're scared. And I'm just saying this evening, when it comes to being a disciple, you got to be willing to war at any cost. And people are going to get mad at you. You got to preach what needs to be preached, say what needs to be said, do what needs to be done, stand on what needs to be stood on, and listen. And people are going to get upset about it, but it'll be all right. Worshipers who'll take up their cross and worship at any cost. Workers who'll take up their tools and build at any cost. Warriors who'll take up their weapons and fight at any cost. And then disciples is a witness, or a disciple will witness at any cost. And he uses verse 34 and 35 in the end here, salt's good, but if salt lost its savor, which means its tang, its bite, if you will, its saltiness. Wherewith shall it be seasoned? It is neither fit for the land nor yet for the dunghill. But men cast it out, and he that hath ears to hear, let him hear. Jesus has talked about being crucified, taking up your cross, the crucifixion. He's talked about construction. He's talked about conflict. And now he's talking about our commission. And the Bible says we're the salt of the earth. And he's telling these disciples that, listen, you got to be salty. You're a witness. And that's what God has put you here to do. But sometimes, he said, the salt loses its saltiness. And I was going to preach on we need some salty Christians. That might go as well as this one has. But I want you to just think for a minute tonight of what all salt can do. And I'm not going to preach on all of it. But number one, salt preserves things. Jesus is talking to a lot of fishermen here. And they understand. He says, come after me. I'll make you become fishers of men. They understood what salt did. And because when they would catch fish, they kept salt on the fish to keep the fish from spoiling. And so it preserves things. And that's what we need in America today. And that's what we need in Wilkes County today is some people to be salt, to preserve some things. You think about this, the sin of sodomy. Sodomy has went from something that was never talked about to now something that is celebrated. You think about pornography as something in the back streets, dark alleys of nowhere that you just had to have the information of where to go see it or where to go watch it, and now it's in our hands. And I'm just saying, salt preserves. Right is right and wrong is wrong. And we live in a generation today, if you begin to call out sin and the sin in a man's life, if you begin to talk about the sin of sodomites and you begin to talk about the sin of pornography and you begin to talk about the sin of this and the sin of that, then you're automatically judging. You don't have the love of Christ, and Christ would never do this, and Christ would never do that. But that's exactly what Christ taught us to do was, listen, we're the salt of the earth, and if you're the salt, you got to preserve some things, and we got to preserve the truth of the Scriptures and the conviction of the Scriptures that, listen, sodomy is wrong, and pornography is wrong, and alcohol is wrong, and adultery is wrong, and listen, if you're saved and you're tattooing your body up, it's wrong. You say, why'd you throw that one in? Because somebody wrote a post about it, and I want to throw it in and hope they watch. People judge them because they're getting tattoos. I'm not judging, I'm just telling you it's wrong. You ought not carve up your body. And if you've done it when you was lost, that's one thing. But if you're saved, you ought not be doing that, putting that into your body. And why? Because the Bible says not to do it. Why would you want to do that? That ain't sober-minded, I can tell you that. I'd have to be drunk to get all that done anyway. The salt will preserve things. That's exactly what we are to do, preserve things, preserve the truth. And listen, in America, love's been forsaken for lust. Satan's worshipped as some kind of saint. Man has magnified himself above the Maker. And listen, we need salty Christians that will preserve the truth of the Word of God, because, listen, the truth of the matter is pornography is not the problem, drug pushers are not the problem, and the homosexuals are not the problem, the crooked politicians are not the problem, Hollywood is not the problem. The problem is we failed to be salty saints. We failed there. Salt, not only does it preserve, let me find my next one, I have it somewhere, but salt also gives flavor. It gives flavor. And the only hope for America is that we can give her something worth tasting, right? And it gives flavor. The Bible said in the book of Job, chapter number 6, can that which is unsavory be eaten without salt? In the commentary I was reading, a little boy was asked, what is salt? And here was his answer. He said, salt is what tastes as bad when you don't have it. Maybe so. My wife is a salty person, I can tell you that. But salt brings flavor to things. And it brings the flavor out of things. And some of the things, you ever ate prison food, listen, if you ain't got no salt, you ain't going to taste nothing. It's just all the same. But you put some salt on it, you can pull a little green bean out of that thing. You put a little salt on it, you can taste that soybean burger a little bit better. And but you know what? So many Christians are living a bland life, a tasteless life. Have you ever heard the analogy, the blind leading the blind? Well, it's the bland leading the bland. I mean, saltless. They don't have a salty life, and there is nothing about your life that is flavorable. There's nothing about your life people see that, I want that. But as a disciple, he said, you're the salt. And you got to be salt. You got to be willing to preserve some things. You got to be willing to put some flavor in something. Make Christ look like something desirable and flavorable in your life. And we don't do that by hooking into the world and Jesus and trying to attract it like that. No, that ain't how we do it. We want to be more like Him. And not a tasteless life, but a very tasteful life. But not only is salt something that gives flavor, salt, it also heals. I was reading some of this the other night with the little babies when they're born in the Bible times. They rubbed them down with salt. Elisha, he cast the salt into the bitter spring, if you remember, and it healed the waters. Salt is an antiseptic. And listen, it'll heal certain things. And listen, salty Christians, being a disciple of Christ, listen, you can help some broken hearts and hopes and homes, and you can be that healer, if you will. By being salty, salt penetrates. I was saying about that. I mean, if you take just a pinch of salt when my throat gets scratchy and I feel like it's sore, or you get that stuff hung in the back of your throat that won't drain, it's just hung there, and I'll gargle, and I'm talking about I'll put that much water in a cup and just a pinch of salt. You know what it does to all that water? It makes it salty. Why? Because it penetrates. Just a pinch. And a whole jug, man, it makes it, every bit of it instantaneously becomes salty. And but the problem with many of us this evening is this. Listen, we've just taken church, and basically what we are is a bunch of little holy salt shakers. That's all we are. And we sit here in our salt. What we do, we salt the salt. But what we got to do, it's a commission. Jesus said you're the salt of the world, not the salt of the church. He said you're salt of the world, you're the salt of the earth. And it's not just talking about in these four walls. That salt will penetrate. And it ought to get beyond these four walls and go on and reach the world with the gospel. We've got to be separate from sin, but we don't isolate ourselves from sinners. We're the salt. I was thinking about this on this salt, and Jesus used it here in the closing part. He said, the salt hath lost its savor, wherewith shall it be seasoned. It is neither fit for the land, nor yet for the dunghill, but men cast it out. And he that hath ears to hear, let him hear. And I was reading about in the Bible days about this salt and how they used it and what they done. And most of the salt in the Bible times came from the Dead Sea. And they would take that salt and they'd take it from the Dead Sea. They would place it in the sun and let the sun shine on it. And after a while, it became usable salt. But if it rained on it and that rain stayed on it too long, then those chemicals, the salty chemicals that's on the end, it just washed them away. And so therefore the salt was not savory. And the salt was not salty, if you will. And it was useless. And it had no zest, it had no taste, it had no flavor about it, it had no bite. And as a matter of fact, they said it became dangerous. And that if you put it on your fields, it would kill the field. And if you put it on the crop, it killed the crop. If you put it in the well, it poisoned the water. And but the one thing that they could use salt for that had lost its zest was to put it on the road. And they could put it on the road, and it would take all the moisture out. And the more you walked on it, the harder the road become. And that's exactly what he's talking about here when a salt has lost its saltiness. At the end of the day, listen, what do men do? They just trod all over it. That's all they do. And I believe the reason the church is in the condition it's in today, why people hate the church, talk about the church, don't want anything to do with the church, and laugh at the church and mock the church, is because the church has lost its saltiness. Lost its saltiness. It has no flavor to it anymore. It's just cast to the roadside and trodden under men's foot, and that's all it does. But to be a disciple this evening, to be a disciple, listen, it's going to cost you to be salty. It's just going to cost you. And salvation's free. Discipleship, it'll cost you something. Let's pray. Our Father, we love you. Thank you again for your word. I pray you bless it, help us, and go with us, Father. We do love you. And bless your name. Amen.
This is Pastor Tim McCann. I want to take this time and say thank you for listening to today's broadcast and also tell you a little bit more about our church. Our service times here at Cherry Grove Baptist Church are every Sunday morning at 9:45 for Sunday school and then 10:45 for the worship service. Every Sunday evening we gather at 6 p.m. and every Wednesday evening we gather at 7 p.m. Cherry Grove Baptist Church has a strong desire to reach the world with the gospel. And if you've heard something today in today's message and it has you wondering where you would spend eternity, we ask you to please contact us through our website, through email, or even by phone at 336-921-4224. We would love to help you understand how you can receive Christ, and He can give you the peace that passes all understanding. And again, we want to say thank you for listening, thank you for watching, and may God bless you is our prayer.